Hi, welcome to a special Benazmanim edition of the Megala Mukais. I've come across something really beautiful that I want to share today. It's the mashal of the glassblower. In Hebrew, he's called a zagag. And we use it in the davening on Yom Kippur of God blowing his breath, kaviyachol, into a vessel. We are the vessel. It has to do with Tkiya Shofar. It's in the pasuk of a Yipak Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim, God breathing life into man and the connection between the soul of man and the divine. It's a mashal I've been familiar with for many years, more than 30 years. I heard about it in yeshiva from the Nefesh HaChaim, from my Rebbe, Shlita. And I saw glass blowing a few times in my life, visiting whether it was an amusement park or a historical place. And it is a fascinating connection of ancient technology of a man putting molten glass into the fire and then blowing his breath into it to give it beautiful shape. And so it's a beautiful mashal that Chazal use for the connection between man and God. And so it's very much a living reality. So just yesterday, I found it in the Perush of the Vilna Gaon on the Sefer Yetzirah, which I've been teaching. And so I wanted to share it to you with you today, a special schematic. So the glass blower breathing life into creation. So we start with the text of the Sefer Yetzirah. And Eser Sfirois Blima Achas Ruach Elokim Chayim Baruch Umevayrach Shmoi Shel Chayoy Lamim Kol V'Ruach V'Dibor V'Hu Ruach HaKodesh. The 10 spheroids of nothingness. One is the breath of the living God. Baruch Baruch Shmoi, the life of the worlds. Now, these three words, Kol Ruach V'Dibor, the Gra changes the girsa. A more logical word order is Ruach Kol V'Dibor. Ruach is the most general and internal to God, Kaviyachol. Then comes voice, and then comes speech, which is the most defined into words. V'hu Ruach HaKodesh, and that ultimately is Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, I don't love the translation holy breath. So that's the text of the Sefer Yetzirah. We know the Sefer Yetzirah is something that Abraham received. I saw recently Rav Sadia Gaon says on the day of his bris, it was given to him by God. Anyway, here's the Perush Hagra, the Sefer Yetzirah. Eser Sfiros Blima. Achshav hu mefarish sidran shel Eser Sfiros. The text is now entering into a description of the order of the 10 spheros. Achas ruach Elokim chayim. He sphere rishoina. This is the first sphera. V'hu kemashal ha'adam hamenapeach bekli zchuchis la'asois kli u'moitzi ruach mimenu. So here the Gra notes the mashal of a person breathing into a tube to create a glass vessel. Yesham asara dvarim. There are 10 things there. We wouldn't have identified 10 things there. The Gra finds 10 things there. Achas ruach shebekirbo, the breath within. Okay, so within the glass blower, there's breath. Bacharkach, kishayoitzehu mischalech leruach mayim. So the breath, of course, if we exhale, okay, carbon dioxide. Well, I play a brass instrument, and there's something in the instrument called a water key, which we call colloquially a spit valve, where you have to let out, not necessarily spit, but water condensation. When we breathe out, there is water in our breath, and of course, there's air. So it's a mixture of gas and liquid. So the Goin is noting that. Mischalek leruach umayim. Hu haritivus, that's the moisture, sheberuach, ve'esh. Of course, when we go outside on a cold winter day and we exhale, we can see our breath because there's, body temperature there. That's pretty warm, the breath coming out from our lungs. So the Gra calls that, he's in the model of the Gimel, the Daled Yesoidos, the four fundamental elements. So there's air, there's water, and there is fire. The Eish Chamimus. And then, so now we've had the Daled Yesoidus, we're now entering into Nispashet Levav Ktsavot Shel HaKli. So the breath of the glass blower is entering into the vessel, and he calls it 6 directions, okay? Which we think of the Cartesian coordinates, the axis X, Y, and Z axis. We're now entering 3-dimensional reality. Kenu benimshal bo yizbarach. Shoyrish haruach shebekir bo yizbarach. V'hu mati v'lo mati. Beruach umayim ve'esh mischalkin mimenu acharkach. She'al ze nemar. So now the Goin connects this beautiful mashal to a pasuk. And the pasuk is the second pasuk of the Torah. V'aretz ha'isasol v'vo v'choyshech al pnei tehom. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei amoyim. Al ze nemar ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei amayim kedavar shenogea ve'eno nogea. V'hu ruach shel amayim she'ala rekia. So this is a very high place. We're still in the waters above the supernal waters, and this is where the Ruach Elokim is touching but not touching, hovering over. Merachefes al pnei hamayim. So beautiful gestalt. We're setting up our understanding of the world as much as we can understand. The Parish of the Gra here on the Sefer Yetzirah. And so here I have a schematic that AI helped me create with a glassblower. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these different parallels again in this schematic. The neshama, the ruach, and the nefesh, because here the Sefer Yetzirah is using the term ruach Elokim, and we know that the human soul that God gave us, we say neshama asher nasata b'kirbi. So there's a neshama, there's a ruach, and a nefesh. And I'll start from the bottom again. The nefesh is milashon vayinafash, to be at rest. Nofesh, we're now in chofesh and nofesh, we're resting, vein azmanim. And so that's the vessel. The glass vessel at the end of the tube is where the breath comes to an end. It's ultimately at rest there. But before it comes to rest, it extends along the X, Y, and Z axes. That's why there's 6 directions, Vav Ktsavos there. And so I have arrows here in our schematic. That's the nefesh, and within it, the 6 directions. We might say that the nefesh here is housing the 6 directions. So in terms of the Daled Yesoidos, really 3 Yesoidos, air, water, and fire, are all acting upon the 4th one, which is Aretz, the earth, or the Afar, really, the Afar. And so it's the recipient of all the action of everything above it, and that's the vessel here. And we're going to see that in other levels of these correspondences, that's like the Nekeva. She's receiving, she's the Kli, the vessel to hold all this bracha that's coming from above. So here in the Daled Yesoidos, it's the Afar, which is the recipient of all the action that's coming from the air, water, and fire. The air, water, and fire are within the Ruach, like we saw that. It was the breath that has moisture and heat in it. And here that's in the tube of the glass blower. The glass blower, man de nafach midilei nafach. The Zohar teaches us that when you breathe out, you're given a little bit of a part of yourself. When a Kodesh Baruch Hu breathed into man, God was sharing some of himself with mankind. Rabbi Kaplan extends it in his commentary that we know there are often 5 names used for the soul: the nefesh, ruach, neshama, the chaya, and yechida. So the chaya and yechida are sometimes called the neshama of the neshama, and they're really housed in terms of the body. If the nefesh, hadam hu nefesh, the Torah says, and the ruach is in our respiratory system and our heart, our neshama is associated with our thoughts, but in our body, you can't really find the Chai and Yechida. If anything, they're housed within the neshama, and that would be associated with tefillin shel rosh, a crown upon our head. So those are the neshama of the neshama, the Chai and Yechida, and that would be the glass blower and the soul of the glass blower. Okay, so very high, beautiful ideas of a Kodesh Baruch Hu blowing into us from himself. And there is another part of the Vilna Gaon that I do want to cite, where he mentions about a certain madrega. I believe he's talking about Atik, and he says it's not in the Yud of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and it's not even in the Kutso Shel Yud. Okay, the very tippy top, the crown of the Yud. There are some things that are so high, they're not portrayed in even the Oisios, the holy letters of the Torah, they're not portrayed at all. And that led me to want to share today this table of correspondences using this mushal of the glass blower, his breath in the tube, and ultimately in the vessel, and to take a look how this plays out according to the Eser Spherois, as the Gra was talking about, the Daled Yesoidos, the Shemos, the Shema Mefirash, different partsufim, personas, ultimately the Ishpizin, we're all familiar with. So let's take a look. So we saw in the schematic the air, the fire, and the water, and ultimately the earth. The vessel is made of sand. Glass is actually heated sand, so that's very much afar. So we understand that correspondence. So looking at the oilamos, we often think that there are four oilamos, and we call them abia, atzilus, bria, yetzira, and we live in the oilam asiya. Above the Olam Atzilos, which is a world of divinity, but before even Atzilus is Milashin, Atzile is your elbow and its extension or something, Ze Etzel Ze, something next to something. So before, like Bria, we might put with the base of Bereshis, Bereshis bara. Bria is the beginning of the Torah. The world of divinity is not described explicitly in the Torah. It starts Bereshis bara Elokim. And we know the Septuagint, they reverse the order. Elokim Bereshis bara. It starts with God. But the Torah noticeably does not start with the Aleph of Elokim. It starts with the base of Bereshis. The Aleph, which precedes the base of Bereshis, is invisible. And that's a different shir about the invisible Aleph. Anyway, the Olam of Atzilus is a world of divinity that is next to the world of creation, but there is even a higher level than that called an Olam of Adam Kadmon, okay, primordial man, Kaviyachol. It has the construct of the 10 spheroids, but on a totally a super high level that we can only know a little bit about, but not about its essence. So those are, in a sense, five Oilamos, okay? In terms of the parts of the soul, so five parts of the soul are pretty clear. The Chaya, the Yechida, the Neshama corresponding to like the Avir, and then the Ruach, we saw the Gra says it has fire and water in it, and then the Nefesh, Adam Hu Nefesh. The Nefesh is very clearly in our body, housed by our body. That's like the Nefesh of Ahamis and the Nefesh Elokis, the living soul, the animal soul within us, the power of life. In terms of the 10 spheroids, so the highest one, Keser Elyon, is again something hovering and all around and indiscernible. Chokhmah, wisdom, Bina, analysis, understanding of wisdom, right? Lahavin davar mitoich davar. And then, in a very interesting shift in the paradigm, instead of having a one-to-one ratio, the Ruach corresponds to six of the spheroids. And the six spheroids are often abbreviated as Vak or Vav Ktsavois, the six directions. And again, I go back to the X, Y, and Z axis for this way and that, and this way and that, and four directions of the compass and up and down. And in terms of the spheros, it's Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which is the majority of the body. It's the torso and the legs. It is the two legs and the male organ. So those are Vav Ketzavois, and those are all like the Ruach, and that's like this long tube connecting the creator with his creation. And the last of the 10 spheros, and it's in a sense, it's equal to all nine above it because it contains all of them, is Malchus. And like I said, it's a feminine idea of being like a nekeva in Lashon Kodesh. A nekeva means that it's perforated to receive bracha, to hold bracha, like a woman receives the seed and she turns it into a fetus and gives birth to a living child. Human life comes from the nekeva. So that's a tremendous power of Malchus. Malchus, just to understand the term kingdom, because a kingdom contains everything. Like your wife contains your world, your wife is your world, and we call her the Kala. Kala is Milashon Kol. Abraham Bakol. God blessed Abraham through a meter called Bakol. And Bakol is your Kala. She contains your whole world. She is everything. Everything you have and all the bracha that you bring, you give it to your wife, and she builds your house. Lo elam lo karasi le ishti ela ishti beisi. I call my wife my house. She contains all my bracha. She takes all the energy that I bring and turns it into love and children and dinner and all the things that we can actually use in this world. So the Malchus, the king, the realm, the kingdom contains everything. It has a palace, it has a throne and a king and a crown. It also has horsemen and even a dungeon and bad guys. And the farthermost, realm, the depths and the distances, the great distances are all connected, are all contained in the Malchus. The Shema Mefayrash Yud Kei Vav Kei. We know there's only four letters in Yud Kei Vav Kei, so how do we apply it to a paradigm that has five parts? The answer is Kutso Shel Yud. Okay, I maybe should have put pictures of the letters, but the top of the Yud has a little chupchik on it, and that's called Kutso Shel Yud, and it's very important. And that represents Keser Elyon. The Yud itself is Chochmah. The first Hey, so we know the Shem Amefirish, of course, is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That means there's two Heys in it. And Hey, of course, is a female letter. It has openings at the top and the bottom. And so the first Hey is Mikabel from the Yud. The Vav, the letter Vav in Hebrew, the word Vav means a hook, a connector. So the Vav of the Yud Kei Vav Kei is connecting the first half to the second half and ultimately putting everything into the Hey Basra, the second Hey of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. And just to share with you an insight into that, the Megala Mukos has a beautiful idea that Ha'isha, we know in Parshas Bereshis, we have Adam. She's only called Chava later, but at first she's called Ha'isha, the woman or the wife. And so he says Ha'isha can be understood as Hey Achrona Shebeshem. The second Hey of the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei is the wife. She is the woman. Okay, that Hey. And the Rizal says about Shuva, Tashuv Hey, the Hey wandering and coming back, the wayward daughter, the wayward wife, if you will, and coming back to reconnect herself to the Yud Kei Vav, putting that back to the shlemus of the Shem. That will be the tikkun, and that is tshuva. So that's the Kutzel Shal Yud Yud, the Hey Rishon of the Vav, and the Hey Basra Yud Kei Vav Kei. I'm not going to go deeply into the partsufim. There are five partsufim. I'll just say the names: Arich and Abba and Ima. This one called Zer Anpin. Zer Anpin is sort of the male correspondent to this female. The female is simply called Nukva. Okay, the female, and that's where when we say liyachid shmo yudke bevavke liyachid kuchabrichu shchinte, that supernal coupling that we're talking about is between Za and Nukva. Okay, enough said. Personas that we recognize from the Torah. So there's different ways that this is presented in different texts between the Zohar and the Ramak and other places. Usually, though, you'd find Yaakov with Leah and Yaakov with Rachel. Of course, Yaakov had four wives. And so there's Zivugim here, and this has to do with the whole idea of Zivugim. And so Chochmah and Bina is Yaakov and Leah, and the Vav Ktsavois, the Tiferes, and Malchus, okay, and particularly using the Yesod, connecting, that's Yaakov and Rachel. I put Moshe here in parentheses. Moshe is like a father of Chochmah in that all the Torah came through Moshe. There's for sure a correspondence between Yaakov and Moshe. The Shlach Kadosh has great stuff about that. The last that we're most familiar with are the Ushpizin. They visit us on Sukkot, the 7 nights of Sukkot before Simchas Torah. So Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef. This Al Pi Kabbalah is the right order as opposed to a chronological order because these avos correspond to these midos, these spherois. Avram Chesed, Yitzchak Gvura, Yaakov Tiferes, Midas Emes, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron are Shavin, Netzach V'Hod, like your two legs, and Yosef corresponds to Yesod, and that's a separate shir unto itself. And the last of the spherois is Malchus, and that is David. And that also needs, further explication about how David, who's like a masculine man and he's a fighter, he's also a poet, but he's representative of a feminine midah, where like Rachel is and the Nukva. And that has to do with David. Remember, David is called Bar Nafli, that he really didn't have a life at all. He would have been, a miscarriage. But Adam Arishon gave him Shivim Shana, 70 years of his life. So David is very much, he says, Tolat ani velo ish. I'm a worm and not a man. So he's Libi halal b'kirbi. My heart is an empty vessel within me. He's a recipient of Shefa from Hashem. He knows that he is nothing, and I'll conclude with nothingness. David is Dalid Vav Dalid, and Dalid is a letter of Dilet. Dilet migarme klum. This is an idea of a nukva. Dalit is like dalut, okay, poverty, having nothing. David has nothing, and his name is Dalit Vav Dalit, nothing with nothing, garnished mit garnished. David is nothingness personified. He knows none of it is mine. I have great accomplishments. I created the united monarchy of ancient Israel. I set up the foundations to build the Beis Hamikdash, but it's not me. It's Kol Hashem, Lecha Hashem Hagdula V'Gvura V'Tiveretz V'Netz V'Achod Ki Chol Hashemayim V'Aretz. So David is delays me garme klum. None of it is mine. Everything is what I'm given, and I'm just acting out and containing everything that's been given to me. So that's David as Nukva. And I thank you for being here. I hope this helps you understand some of more of the texts and getting a sense of the gestalt of the setup of how these things fit together in the greater scheme. So thank you for being here. Have a great Bein Hazmanim. See you next time.